14 June 1942, the Western Desert, 60 kilometers south of Tobruk. The air smells of cordite and hot sand. A British corporal named Dennis Beckett crouches behind a rusted lorry chassis, his hands cradling something that, to any reasonable observer, looks utterly ridiculous. It is roughly the size and shape of a waste paper bin. It has no proper sight, no elegant mechanism, no satisfying heft of engineered precision. Its barrel is stubby and undignified. One of the men in his section calls it the drain pipe. Another calls it something considerably less printable. Beckett, however, is not laughing. He has seen what this thing does. Roughly 400 meters away, a column of German armor is advancing through the shimmering heat. Panzer IIIs mostly, with a pair of hulking Panzer IVs anchoring the rear. Their crews are confident, veteran soldiers of Rommel's Afrika Korps who have punched through British lines before and expect to do so again. They have not yet seen the drain pipe. They do not know what is waiting for them. Beckett steadies himself. He checks the projectile is seated correctly. He calculates range by eye, the way a man calculates after months of practice in conditions that would have broken most people. Then he squeezes the trigger. What happens next defies the weapon's appearance entirely. A hollow, percussive crack splits the desert air. The lead Panzer shudders. A geyser of flame erupts from its side. The tank stops. It does not reverse. It does not fire back. It simply stops, and then it begins to burn. The weapon Beckett is holding is the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. It is, by almost any aesthetic standard, one of the ugliest and most improbable weapons ever fielded by a major military power. It looks, as one veteran memorably described it, like something a plumber had assembled during his lunch break. It is uncomfortable to carry, physically demanding to operate, and deeply unglamorous in every respect. And in the North African theater of the Second World War, it became one of the most devastatingly effective anti-armor weapons the Allies possessed. This is its story. To understand why the PIAT existed, you first have to understand the crisis it was designed to solve. By 1940, the British Army was confronting an uncomfortable truth. Its infantry had almost no effective way of destroying enemy armor at close range. The Boy's anti-tank rifle, which had seemed adequate during its introduction in 1937, was already struggling against the increasingly thick hides of German tanks. The weapon could penetrate roughly 21 millimeters of steel at 300 meters, a figure that had been acceptable when German tanks averaged 15 to 20 millimeters of plating. By 1940, German frontline armor was running at 30 millimeters and climbing. The Americans were developing the bazooka, a rocket-propelled solution that would prove effective but carried its own problems. Rocket propulsion creates backblast. Backblast is a column of superheated gas and flame that erupts from the rear of the weapon when fired. In confined spaces, cellars, hedgerows, the tight streets of North African towns, backblast is not merely inconvenient, it is lethal to the operator and everyone nearby. It also announces the firer's position with the subtlety of a bonfire. The Germans had the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck, both capable weapons, but both burdened with their own tactical limitations. The Panzerschreck, essentially a copy of the American bazooka, had the same backblast problem and required a protective shield added to prevent its operators burning their own faces off. The Panzerfaust was devastatingly simple, but single-use, disposable, and only effective at ranges that put the infantryman uncomfortably close to several tons of moving steel. What British planners needed was something different, something that used a shaped charge, a Monroe effect warhead, capable of penetrating armor regardless of the target's thickness through the focused jet of superplastic metal it generated on detonation, but without the backblast problem. Something an infantryman could fire from cover, from a trench, from a window, without announcing himself to every enemy within a quarter mile. The answer seemed impossible. Shaped charges required propellant. Propellant created backblast. The physics appeared non-negotiable. What they needed was someone willing to ignore what the physics appeared to say. As it happened, they had exactly that person. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker was, by most accounts, a man of formidable and sometimes exhausting inventiveness. He had already given the Army the Blacker bomb, a spigot mortar designed for home guard use that fired a large bomb from a spigot rather than a tube. The spigot mortar principle was elegant. Instead of igniting propellant inside a barrel, the bomb sat atop a fixed spigot, with the propellant charge inside the bomb itself. When fired, the bomb's own charge drove it off the spigot and into the air. No barrel, no conventional propellant chamber. Blacker realized this same principle could be miniaturized. If you could fire a bomb off a spigot rather than out of a tube, you eliminated the need for a tube through which explosive gases had to travel. You could, in theory, fire a shaped charge warhead with no meaningful backblast at all, because there was no barrel from which gases could escape rearward. The propellant gases, contained within the bomb itself, were directed forward as the bomb left the spigot. The infantry anti-tank design was handed from Blacker's initial concept to the Directorate of Special Weapons and Vehicles, where a team under the supervision of Major Millis Jeffries developed it into a fieldable weapon. Jeffries was a figure of near legendary status in the British wartime weapons development community. The head of MD1, sometimes called Churchill's Toy Shop, a semi-secret establishment at the Firs in Whitechurch, Buckinghamshire, England, tasked with developing unconventional weapons outside normal procurement channels. The resulting Piat weighed roughly 14.5 kilograms, or about 32 pounds, unloaded. Its total length was approximately 99 centimeters, or just under a meter. The bomb it fired weighed 1.1 kilograms and carried a shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating, according to wartime specifications, a minimum of 75 millimeters of homogeneous armor plate. In practice, against the face-hardened plate used on German tanks, performance varied, but this was still considerably more penetration than any infantry portable weapon Britain had previously fielded. The operating mechanism, to put it charitably, was demanding. Inside the Piat's body sat a massive spring, roughly as powerful as the spring mechanism in a heavy-duty industrial stapler, scaled up to something you might use to launch a small car. This spring, when compressed and held by a trigger sear, provided the energy to drive the spigot forward into the bomb's propellant when the trigger was pulled. The propellant then fired the bomb off the spigot, while simultaneously, through gas action, recocking the spring for the next shot. In theory. In practice, if the first shot failed to generate enough gas pressure, perhaps because of a faulty round or extreme cold affecting the propellant, the spring would not recock automatically. The operator would then have to cock the weapon manually. This involved bracing the stock against the ground, placing both feet on the shoulder rest, and using the full strength of both legs and back to compress the spring against approximately 90 kilograms of resistance. It was, in the words of more than one veteran, like lifting a car with your legs while lying on your back. The Piat was manufactured primarily by the Imperial Chemical Industries and various subcontractors across the Midlands. Total production figures for the war remain partially classified, but estimates suggest somewhere in the region of 115,000 units were produced by the end of 1945,
a remarkable figure for a weapon that had gone from concept to production in under 2 years.
Its debut was, to put it generously, mixed. The weapon was new to troops who had not trained extensively with it. The cocking mechanism was unlike anything else in service, and the effective range, officially listed at 115 meters for a moving target and up to 350 meters against a stationary one, required a degree of nerve that not every infantryman could summon when a 26-ton tank was advancing toward his position. But as familiarity grew, so did effectiveness. Experienced crews developed a feel for the weapon's characteristics that no training manual could fully convey. They learned to use the Piat's silence, relative to a bazooka or an anti-tank rifle, to their advantage. Fired from an enclosed position, the Piat produced almost no visible backblast signature. A tank crew hit by a Piat round frequently had no immediate idea where the shot had come from. This psychological uncertainty was its own tactical weapon. Accounts from veterans of the North African campaign describe German tank commanders becoming noticeably more cautious in terrain where Piats might be concealed. Wadis, built-up areas, the ruins of coastal settlements along the Libyan littoral. One report from the 7th Armored Division's operational records notes that Panzer crews in the Alamein sector began refusing to advance without infantry escort through broken ground, a behavioral change directly attributed to anti-tank infantry weapons, including the Piat. Exact figures for Piat kills in North Africa are difficult to verify. Records were often incomplete, and crew claims were notoriously unreliable in both directions. But the weapon's effect on enemy tactical doctrine appears beyond reasonable dispute. The Piat also had an unexpected secondary use. Its shaped charge round, when fired at walls, bunkers, or fortified positions, proved devastatingly effective at close range. In the street fighting that characterized the later North African campaign and the subsequent Italian campaign, this made the Piat effectively a portable assault weapon, something between an anti-tank gun and a demolition charge. The contrast with German and American equivalents is instructive. The American M1 bazooka, introduced in 1942, was in many respects a more elegant weapon. It fired a 60mm rocket with a range of roughly 180 meters against moving targets, and its reloadable tube design was intuitive for trained soldiers. But the backblast was significant. Roughly 4 meters of cleared space was required behind the firer, and in the confined terrain of North African towns and desert escarpments, this was frequently unavailable. The M1 also had reliability issues in extreme heat, with propellant performance degrading noticeably above 38 degrees Celsius, a temperature that the Western Desert exceeded with casual regularity. The German Panzerfaust, by the time it reached frontline service in numbers, was arguably more powerful than either, with variants capable of penetrating up to 200 millimeters of armor. But it was single-use, had an effective range of only 30 meters in its earliest variants, and produced a very visible backblast plume that made the firer immediately identifiable. In the open desert, this was often a death sentence. The Piat, by contrast, was reusable, produced minimal backblast, could be fired from an enclosed position, and its bomb's shaped charge was, crucially, effective regardless of the velocity at which it struck the target. Shaped charge warheads, unlike kinetic penetrators, do not rely on speed. The penetrating jet is generated purely by the detonation geometry of the charge itself. This meant a Piat round fired at extreme close range was as effective as one fired from 80 meters away. It was a physics advantage that neither the bazooka nor the Panzerfaust fully shared.
The German army, recognizing the effectiveness of the spigot mortar concept, did examine captured Piats with considerable interest. There is no evidence they directly copied the design. The Wehrmacht's procurement pipeline was already committed to its existing anti-tank solutions. But the weapon influenced post-war thinking in several nations about the advantages of propellantless launch systems for anti-armor munitions. The Piat's historical impact is genuinely difficult to quantify with precision, and honesty requires acknowledging that. Claimed kills in the heat of battle are notoriously unreliable. Crew reports were frequently exaggerated upward, sometimes from honest error and sometimes from less honest motivations. Records for North African engagements are particularly patchy, given the fluid nature of the campaign and the conditions in which documentation was maintained. What is demonstrable is the Piat's psychological effect. The Piat changed the calculus for German armor commanders operating against British infantry. It meant no position held by British infantry could be treated as automatically safe for unsupported armor. Every wadi, every cluster of buildings, every ridgeline became a potential source of anti-armor fire that could kill a tank at conversational distances. This force-multiplying effect, infantry suddenly capable of stopping armor that had previously been able to simply drive over them, had implications for German operational planning that went well beyond individual tank kills. The Piat went on to serve in Italy, Normandy, and the Northwest European campaign, where it was used to tremendous effect in the bocage fighting and the urban battles of 1944 and 1945. It earned 6 Victoria Crosses during the war, a figure that speaks in its quiet way to the extremity of the situations in which it was most often employed. Several Piats survive today in museum collections, most notably at the Imperial War Museum in London and the Tank Museum at Bovington. Handling one, even inert and behind glass, conveys an immediate impression. It is heavy, ungainly, and unattractive in a way that makes its battlefield record more impressive, not less. Return now to that desert morning in June 1942. Corporal Beckett is still crouching behind his rusted lorry chassis. The burning Panzer throws orange light across the sand. Somewhere in the following confusion, a second tank turns and begins to withdraw. The drain pipe has spoken. Consider what has just happened. A single infantryman, armed with a weapon that cost less to produce than a decent motor car, has stopped a vehicle that weighs roughly as much as a semi-detached house and carries enough firepower to destroy an entire section of men in seconds. He has done it without announcing his position. He has done it without needing a clear line of sight behind him. He has done it, moreover, with a weapon that took British designers less than 18 months to move from concept to production. The Piat was never beautiful. It was never beloved. Veterans who carried it often describe it with a mixture of respect and resentment. The respect earned by a tool that worked when it mattered, and the resentment born of a cocking mechanism that could strip the back muscles of a grown man on a cold morning. It was not the weapon anyone would have chosen if given a free hand and unlimited resources, but it was the weapon they had, and what they did with it, in the dust of North Africa, in the ruins of Italian hill towns, in the flooded orchards of Normandy, was something that no amount of aesthetic improvement could have changed. The ugliest weapon of the war turned out to be one of its most important.